Howdy, everybody. Chess College. Hope your weekend was good. Um, it is Monday, October 19th. We're storming through this semester. Hope you guys are hanging in there, staying well, staying healthy, keeping engaged in your classes and this new world we're living in, and staying healthy. Today, we're going to talk about a revolutionary era in our cinema that didn't take place in this country, took place in France. And they has a name called the French New Wave. If you remember, a couple of weeks ago I lectured on Italian neo-realism. Well, French New Wave was another game changer, and it came out of a French magazine called Cahiers de Cinema, and which essentially notes on cinema. And they, the critics who wrote for that magazine, took cinema and they treated it like Shakespeare, high art, Picasso. They didn't treat it like a low, art form, movies. And they mostly wrote about American movies, a lot of film noir type of movies and westerns and they embraced filmmakers like Orson Welles and Alfred Hitchcock in a huge way, and it kind of resurrected their careers and made people in this country look at them in a different way. They just weren't Hollywood directors cranking out movies. They were auteurs. Remember what I talked about last week, the auteur theory, authors of their own work. Well, these writers who wrote for this magazine, mostly male for the most part, decided that they wanted to also make movies, but they don't have the ways and means that many people in America do in Hollywood. They don't have a studio system, and so they have to make do with what they have available. And so a couple filmmakers, half a dozen of them, made films around the same area, 1959, 1960, 1961, and they're all from France, and they referred to them as the French New Wave because these films took the world of cinema by storm. They changed once again, like the Italian Neo Wave, made American filmmakers look at film in a way, and that's when we came up with film noir and all these great middle 50s movies directed by Elie Kazan and John Huston and Alfred Hitchcock. They made that we talked about last week when I asked you guys to watch All Without a Cause and On the Waterfront. Those are definitely influenced by the Italian neorealism. Now, French, they start making these movies. They're very personal movies, meaning they don't have a lot of car chases and superheroes, guys running around in fast cars and shooting everybody up like we do here in this country so much. They had to tell real stories using what actors they could for very little pay. And so 2 movies I want to talk about today and have you guys look at them, maybe write your next paper about it. We'll see what I feel like on Wednesday. One person was named Francois Truffaut, and he was a writer for that magazine I mentioned, Cahiers de Cinema, and he really loved American cinema, especially Alfred Hitchcock and Orson Welles, and like I said before, John Ford, who was kind of interesting choice to make as he was a studio Hollywood director. The other 2, not so much. Ford would never admit that he was an auteur. He would just say, I'm a hired hand, and that's how he always talked about his movie career. If you look at, I'm going to show you, make sure you look at, I'm going to sign a new video on the story of film. They go watch a Canopy. I don't know what section it's going to be from this section, 59 to about 69. Look at it, the documentary at your leisure, and also read the chapter in the book, chapter 7. And it covers 1959 to 1969. Now, it covers a lot of world cinema, not just American, but it covers British cinema, which was changing rapidly. They had, after the war, they took them quite a bit of time to recover. And then during this time in the 60s, they had their own version of Italian neorealism. And they made some stunning films that were known as kitchen sink dramas, because there's usually a scene around a dirty kitchen sink. Once again, it's usually about working class people trying to get out of their situation. And there's some brilliant, brilliant films from this time and era, directed by Lindsay Anderson, who directed The Sporting Life, about a rugby player trying to make it out of his hometown. Saturday night, Sunday morning. Wonderful film. The Loneliness of a Long Distance Runner. Room at the Top, another wonderful film that were coming out of Great Britain. And there was in the late 50s, there was I guess it's another revolution in the theater. And when a play showed up called Look Back in Anger, written by John Osborne. And it's about three people sharing a flat, two women and a guy, and they're not happy campers. They want more out of life than just what their parents had. And so it started a revolution of sorts out of the normal entertainment fantasy-like films to realism, like the French New Wave and like the Italian neorealism. And with the films, the earliest film was probably Look Back in Anger with Richard Burton, one of his first roles he ever did. And he's a disgruntled artist who wants to be a jazz musician, but he's forced to work a fishmonger, and he's not happy, and he makes everybody else's life miserable. And so they called it the Angry Young Man movement, which later on, I would say definitely French had angry young men. Americans, that's how punk rock came out, folks, angry young men. Hopefully there's some women thrown in there too. But they're angry. They're not happy with their social standing or what looks like a bleak future. They don't want to be what their parents were. They want to move on and change and do something in the world that makes a difference. French New Wave was happening during this time of transition in cinema. American cinema had gotten bloated. Television had come in and kind of killed people going to the movies. They stayed home and watched TV instead. How did Hollywood try to get them back? Well, they tried to make big blockbusters, and they came up with things called Technicolor, Cinerama, Smell-O-Vision. Yes, folks, you could go to the theater and smell what's on the screen. That didn't last long. It was to do anything technical that your television can't do to get you back in the theater. And what Hollywood came up with when they started producing these big bloated epics, a lot of them are Bible epics like the Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur. These were huge movies, and they did well. You couldn't see, they were bigger than TV. And so most people, there was no such thing as color TV in this time. And so these are big epics with a big screen. You had big music. Everything's big. But we were kind of losing our way. The French couldn't do that because they don't have the ways and means. They don't have the Hollywood system. So they had to go out into the street with 16 millimeter cameras, usually black and white, and with some actors who were not known in this country. They're not famous, but they became famous. And so Francois Truffaut, his first movie is called The 400 Blows. It's essentially an autobiographical film of a young boy. I think he's 12 or 13, and how he struggles to get through life. His parents are indifferent to him. They have their own issues. His mother would rather get rid of him so she could live her life. She's a former beauty queen who still thinks she has hope to get some happiness out of life, and she's married to a guy, not his father, it's his stepfather, and he's a decent guy. He brings home the bacon, but she's bored with him, in a sexual way, and so she goes off and has affairs, and the boy is just a bothersome thing that's in her way of pursuing her attempt to have some kind of passion in her life. And he's a bright kid, but he's kind of a troublemaker at school. He doesn't get along with the teachers at school. They don't get along with him. And so in the meantime, he skips school. He sees his mother with another man, kissing another man on the street, and she sees him. He's supposed to be in school, but they see each other and they act like they don't know each other. And for the rest of the movie, he knows this information, and then she tries to play nice to him and essentially almost tries to bribe him. Doesn't really talk about what happened, but she becomes like really ultra nice to him in a phony way, and he's not buying it. He gets in trouble, steals a typewriter, folks. This is before computers. And so he steals a typewriter. He is caught, and he is sent to what we would call juvenile hall, except for he is sentenced to this boys' school, like a reform school. Doesn't get along in there, and he escapes. And he runs away. He's only 12 years old. How far is he going to get? And the movie ends on an ambiguous note. You don't know what's going to happen. And that's the beauty of the last frame of that movie. What's going to happen to this boy? We don't know. But it was Truffaut's sort of childhood. Not all of it, but a lot of it was pretty accurate. He was left to his own devices as a very young guy roaming around the streets of Paris. And he was a thief, and he did not well in school, but he discovered cinema and saved him from his own worst destructive behavior. It's a wonderful poetic film. The acting's great. The kid who plays the part of essentially Francois Truffaut's young boy, they ended up making 5 more movies together throughout the years up until the early 70s. And the kid plays the same part as he did in the first one. And now he's growing up. By the way, this kid, he's no longer a kid. He just made a new movie last year. He's well into his 75 or something now. And he plays an old man he plays Louis XIV in France. Period piece. He mostly lays in bed the whole time with a big wig on. And he's about 75 or 76 in real life. But as a young man, he was an incredible sensitive actor. And like I said, they did many movies together as he grew up. It made a huge critical response. The year before, he had been very critical of the Cannes Film Festival, which was really a really important film festival held in the south of France in Cannes. And so he didn't get invited. But the next year, he submitted this film, and it won the Palme d'Or, which is like an Oscar for the best movie. And it put him on the map. It put French New Wave on the map. He had a very healthy career. He died early in the early 80s of brain cancer. He was just barely in his 50s, maybe his 50s. But he was an actor also. And if you know anything about Steve Spielberg movies, maybe you've seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He plays the French scientist in that comes up with a way to contact the aliens. That's Francois Truffaut, folks. Anyway, he lived for cinema. It was everything to him. So I relate to these guys. Maybe it's not healthy to have everything relate to cinema, but they filtered through their philosophies, their love, their dislikes, their what they believe in through the lens of a camera. The other one that came out at the very same time, equally as important, different type of filmmaker, totally, was Jean-Luc Godard, who's still alive, folks. He's pushing 90, and he made a film 2 years ago. He's still out there. His films are very, I would say they're collages, experimental video collages now, but always worthwhile looking at. He still believes in the power of cinema. He made a movie called Breathless, which once again changed everything there is to change. Is about two people, an American expatriate played by Jean Seberg, who's speaking French. It's all in subtitles, but she's an American, and she meets this very charming sort of criminal type who thinks he's Humphrey Bogart, really, but he's not, Jean-Paul Belmondo. And they have a love affair. They're sort of outlaws in society, and then he becomes a real outlaw, and he accidentally or purposefully, we don't know, it's left ambiguous, shoots a policeman, and now for the rest of the movie he's being pursued by the police, and he's going to get caught, folks. In the meantime, there's lots of quirky, cool little scenes with her and him in hotel rooms, smoking lots of cigarettes, and very provocative, sexy. She's in her underwear. He's in his his underwear. So we know they're having sex, but they're not married, folks. And at the very end of the day, she betrays him to the police. I don't want to explain it all, but she does. And the police find him, and he runs from them after he tries to shoot them, and they shoot him down. And then he's dying with his last dying breath. She leans over to him. She's like, "What have I done? Why did I do this?" And he's okay with it. He dies. So it's very romantic that way. And it's very much based on the genre, I would say, gangster film genre in this country. Absolutely. Whereas Truffaut's movie's really not, I couldn't define it as a genre. I don't know what it would be. A coming of age, I guess. That'd be good, yeah. Anyway, so these films came out roughly a year apart, and these guys both wrote for the magazine Cahiers du Cinema, and they they tipped the world upside down. Hollywood people, young up-and-coming directors like Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, Dennis Hopper, Hal Ashby, Robert Altman, who hadn't made a splash yet. They're mostly toiling in TV. They saw these films and they thought, that's the kind of films we want to make. So not this week, but next week I'll be talking about those films which changed everything in American cinema, starting with the film Bonnie and Clyde, The Graduate, Easy Rider, etc. So this is the French New Wave Day. There was a woman in there, Agnes Varna, who just died this year. She was 89, I think. And her films never really set the world on fire like these two guys did, because she was a woman, and it's always been a man's game. But she made a film called Chloe 9 to 5. It's about, follows a woman in France who has had an examination, and she thinks she might have cancer. She's a beautiful young woman, and she thinks she might die. And so she spends the rest of the day, literally doesn't have a lot of plot. She's mostly wandering around France, looking in windows. And at first she's very terrified. And then towards the end of the movie, she kind of resigns herself to it and kind of looks at life a little differently. And then they find out the diagnosis turns out to be she's going to be okay. So she's fine, but she takes this journey on thinking she may be on her going to get sick with cancer and die. And so this movie was a very rare movie that's part of the French New Wave. Agnes, by this woman who always had trouble getting financing for her films, probably because she was a woman. I'm going to talk about women directors maybe on Wednesday. She was important. She started making documentaries, whatever she could do. She was married to a filmmaker, French filmmaker, who got more famous than she did. So they came to America. She made a movie here in LA. This would be about 1969. Her husband was making a really interesting film in 68, I believe, in LA. And she got enough money to make her film called The Lions of Love, I think. It's kind of a hippy-dippy film with people walking around essentially naked, smoking pot, and very 60s. Stars Viva from Andy Warhol and the two guys who wrote and sang the leads in Hair, the stage play. Anyway, while her husband's making this film called Model Shop. This guy, played by Gary Lockwood, has just received this draft notice to go to the Army. So he's kind of aimlessly, hopelessly driving his cool sports car around Hollywood, and he sees this woman coming out of the shop. Turns out she's a high fashion model, so he kind of stalks her the rest of the movie because he has nothing to lose. He wants to meet her. Not a lot of plot, but it's kind of a thumbnail sketch of what LA looked like in the late 60s. And there's an important rock band in there, Spirit, who had a pretty big hit in the 60s. You probably never heard of them. They're in the book. They play his friend. And so it's a very loose, not much plot, but it's got some what should I say? It's got some meat on its bones because we're dealing with the draft and how many young men in America, myself included, folks, got drafted to go into the Vietnam War. It was a real thing. Yes, folks, it was real. If you want to see how real it was, just as an extra thing, if anybody, I'm going to give this, I'm just throw this out there right now. If anybody wants to say about it, if you don't know who those are, you probably don't. But during the 1960s, there was a Chicago convention in Chicago, folks, 1968, the height of the Vietnam War. And there was rioting there because the kids were protesting on the street against the government, and the cops came down on them hard. And they busted a lot of heads, and there were 7 defendants that were accused of inciting a riot. And this film is about their trial. It was a big deal when I was a kid. The Chicago 7 was a big deal. It shook the whole nation because it definitely looked at the police started the riot, not the kids. Anyway, that's history. Watch that movie, write a paper. There's 5 extra points in it for you. But you got to tell me writing it. Make sure it's 3 pages, critical, just like what we're doing. You got to watch it, though, and it's only on Netflix. So if you don't have Netflix, I don't know how else to see it. Maybe you can pay for it. Anyway, I'll make that in the announcements as a sidebar if you want. So anyway, I'd like you to see it so you can see what it was like in this country in 1968. Maybe you've heard about it from your grandparents, maybe not. Besides music changing everything, rock and roll, Jimi Hendrix, The Who, the Cream, Beatles, etc. Politics was changing everything because we had a draft. Yes, boys, you could get drafted if you're 19 to 26. You could be drafted into the Army. You don't have a say in it. And if you dodge the draft, you could go to prison for 5 years. Or you could go to Vietnam. And almost 60,000 young boys were killed over there. So it could well be a death sentence if you're going to go. Be that as it may, check it out. So the French New Wave was, as the more we look back on it, we see the importance of this these films. I have watched, I've read all the books. I got Godard's book right over there. You know what it's called, folks? Everything is cinema. That's where I got the term, because he made that comment. Everything is cinema, and people thought he was joking. But now think about it, folks. Think about it close. Everybody's filming themselves for YouTube. Everybody's sending little cute videos of your dinner or some party you went to and you're drinking, or God forbid, don't send a sex tape out there, folks. It will get you crucified eventually. But I understand youth. I understand it very well. And we could film that stuff on our cell phones, stick it on YouTube. You're a filmmaker. So the access to filming something has never been more accessible in the history of our world. But before that, these guys were making meaningful films. They treated cinema like a high art form. The difference is between, say, painting or music is it's a collective. You need other people around you to make it happen. You could write a song, you could paint a painting, you could write a novel by yourself. It's hard to make a movie, but you know, it's getting easier. I'm making 2 movies right now, essentially doing everything myself. I've written it, I do the camera work, I do the sound, I do the music, I even act in them. So yes, you could do it all yourself if you want, so desire, if you think it's interesting enough. If not, don't do it. Anyway, so French New Wave, important. Check it out. I'll post some stuff for you to look at on YouTube. I may assign one of these. I may assign one of these films to write your next paper on. I won't do that yet. I know your other essays just got in, so now I've got essay 3 and essay 4 to grade, and you know how slow I am. I hope you're keeping the faith out there. Hope you're watching movies in a different way than you've ever watched them before, because they're important. They're a reflection on who we are. Absolutely. So, be that as it may, don't ever forget, everything is cinema. See you next time.